Depart, and one was, what were the other two? Um, Wake and Dream. Yeah. You had a question over here?
It's interesting that you do say that because I teach poetry, so one of the things that I try to get a lot of my students to understand that, art comes from the body. There's a natural rhythm within ourselves that we sometimes fail to listen to. And so for me, I do have to sort of reflect inward to think about how the rhythm of a poem is going to be. And it's exactly that. It's like I'm listening to my heart. That heart has a very constant rhythm to it. And if you sort of tap into that, you do get yourself following into those patterns of being able to speak from that. And it's strange to say that, it comes from the heart because it literally does. If you allow yourself to sort of listen to your heartbeat. One of the things that I used to like to do when I used to go to the clinic as a kid is that there was always a stethoscope that's always sitting there, and I would always grab it and put it on and listen to my heart, which is kind of a crazy thing because I find myself like feeling it now. You feel that pulse, if you just put your hand on your neck or on your wrist, that pulse is there. And I try to get my students to understand that. So I have them like sit there for like moments looking for their pulse. And I have them close their eyes and just think of words that would go in tandem with that beat. Because when you get in touch with that, it's like you're going to be telling the story of your life, the story of your own existence, because that's what it's connecting you to, right? Yeah, poetry is really weird like that. I mean, in a lot of ways, I don't feel like I am the steward of the poem. I don't ever feel like I'm in control of writing these poems because they sort of just come to me. Like I'll be driving home one day and all of a sudden this line will kind of just jump out of nowhere. And I have my phone on, so I'll turn it to record. I used to carry like a little notebook in my pocket all the time. Now I don't do that. I just have the recorder. And I would just, blurt out the line. And when I get home, I'll type it out. And that's the beginning of like what would start a poem or what would start a stanza in a poem is this, these poems that just kind of jump out of the bushes and, startle me, and they just come out of nowhere. And I think a lot of it is just that my body or my mind is sort of tuning into things that are happening outside, and I'm just trying to survive, living here and keeping myself moving forward. But my mind has a tendency to like wander, and I think those phrases and those words, they come to me, and so I just have to focus on that and write them down. And plus, I love words. It's crazy to think about. And when I teach my students about rhythm, I try to get them to think about syllables, like multisyllabic words versus a single syllabic word or a single syllable word. If you say one syllable over and over and over, you start to hear that rhythm. If you say a three-syllable word over and over and over, it has its own rhythm. And then when you start to mix them, it creates, this kind of hop. That I just call it a hop, So words for me are just kind of fascinating in the way that they sort of work with each other. And it's crazy that we're sitting in a library because the amount of literature that we create is from just 23 letters and some others maybe. But for me, that's just a fascinating idea. It's like that building next to us is a composition of only those letters and those consonants and vowels. It's weird. I don't know. Thank you. Yes. Rhythm. I think rhythm is everything. My spouse, for a while there, I would go off into my room, my where my computer is, and I would kind of walk in circles wherever we lived. I would have a space that I would write, and when I come to a poem where I think it's working, then I would print it out and I would stand, in this circle and wander around, just reading it out loud. For a long time, he wasn't sure what I was doing. Just talking to myself in the room back there by myself is like, he finally came up and said, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm reading a poem. A poem is being born right now, and it's like, I'm trying to hear it. I'm trying to feel it. I'm trying to, give it out. So over time, that just became a thing. It's like, oh, he's back there talking to his poems. So it's something that I have to do. I have to like listen to it. I have to feel the words. And when you're utilizing words, you have to feel it in your mouth, and you know when something doesn't fit because it comes out awkward, you know. Yeah, it's like a word. One of my word my brother used to tell me that he thought was really funny. He would tell me, "You're like a kitten with a lisp," and then he would say "thittens." I would say that over and over and over, "thittens, thittens," and just to kind of get the feeling of that. Words for me are like that. You have to kind of get comfortable with them. So, yeah, that's how a lot of these poems come out, as I walk in circles and just read and read and read. Yeah. It's closing time.
So while we're on the topic of like intention and language, and in one of the poems in here, I can't remember which one, but you do use, is it Apache? Can you tell us about the intention with that?
Yeah, that would, I think, it's called Elements. The poem is called Elements. There was a moment in my life where I really neglected or really tried to push the cultural side of who I was out. There was a part of me that didn't want to be Native American. There was a part of me that didn't want to be indigenous. There's a part of me that didn't want to be male. There's a part of me that didn't want to be who I was. Only because I live in America. We all know what that feels like. If you're an other, you just feel it. So for me, coming from a small town and a small reservation, I didn't even know who I was there. You live up in the mountains. You do what you want for freedom, and all of a sudden you're plopped into a place like this, and you get to see all kinds of perspectives, and how that pertains to you changes your outlook on who you are. And I saw how people looked at me. I saw what they would say to people of color, of difference, and it made me feel sad. So for me, for a while, I was trying to push that part of me away, and trying to fit in somewhere. But my spirit didn't let me do that. I mean, it's still there. So the poem Elements made me think of my great-grandfather, and just even like my mother talking about my great-grandfather, and she used to live with him, so he would always talk to her about a lot of the cultural things that he knew, and she would in turn try to tell me, but because I was trying to push that away, I then forgot some of that stuff. But now, as I'm talking about it, a lot of it is still there. I mean, I think it's embedded in me somehow. So when I wrote this poem, I was thinking about my great-grandfather and telling those stories to my mother. So that's really how this poem came to be. It's just talking about stories and trying to pass them on. But I tried to resist, but it made its way in still. So, but. There's a big part of me as well, also utilizing my indigenous language. In my first book, I did use it a lot more, but I was also thinking in the terms of how colonization had trained my mind to work with language. So we're taught to italicize foreign language, right? Then I decided that I'm not going to do that anymore. I mean, my language is probably the first language of this country, this land. So why should it be the foreign language? So for me, I try to take, try to take ownership of that. So when I write my language, I don't use it in italics anymore because I want it to be the language. And I felt like I was forced to learn English, you know. And it's ironic because that's what I ended up doing is I'm an English teacher, you know. So I just think it's kind of funny, you know. It's one of those trickster things. Yeah. But yeah, that's that poem that you were talking about. That yeah. So I mix both the indigenous language, and I don't think there's very many poems in this collection that does that. My book Ghost Word, however, uses a lot of that because in that book it's more autobiographical. There's a lot more realness in that book as opposed to this one. And my first one uses a lot more, but it's crazy. Like my third book hardly ever uses it, but so I don't know if I'm like trying to appease a broader audience or if it's just something that wasn't necessary for the poem. I haven't really decided that yet, but I'm not going to read that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read another poem. This one's, I guess, page 54. This one is called Stasis. It's another one of my crazy experiences growing up. This one is for Tommy. When the spores scatter, we catch the dust. In our nostrils, we catch each other looking away, while stretching out and gazing out beyond the spruce, such a stumbling stare. Sprawling under a spruce tree after the red-spotted caps wilt, stretching outward in a bluish star stream, spraying across the ground, and the spores come settling again. With the low-hanging limbs and prickling seed pods curving over the area of pitch, and sailing over and around our heads into reliquary, into vascular, into cochlea. Sleeping and sitting, we sit, flaxen and muted as needles break free and quietly fall, landing on our pleated backs and waxen calves. The sunrise, the trickle from where I sit, an untouching coral, stirring, rolling onto our bellies, cold and damp. The sky rotates, the land rotates, the day rotates, and throughout rotates. These bodies beneath the post office and adobe, me a silhouette, us a silhouette, time to slumber, time to reach, ever with the remnants of gills vibrating in exaltation. Away, extending, soon it will be time to reach deep into the caps of our intention, and touch took so long to encumber the deepening case, or the deepening ease. Perhaps later, but for now we sleep now, sleeping under the indigo sky, waiting all day for our eyes to recognize ourselves high above as a looming limb.
You have something, Jess? Oh, he's
Oh.
waving at me? I thought that was, I got a question.
Okay. So we're going to wrap this up. Okay. Yes.
Yes, please. So So the question for the online people, the question was, how did he decide when, for using his journaling, how far to go back or forward through his journals and to the book, right?
Let's see. I think as far back as I went with a couple of these poems was probably 1989, 1990. The one about the fist pounding, that was that first incident that I went back to, and I remember writing specifically about that situation. So that's one of the older experiences that I had. So I guess I wasn't really judging. You know, I thought that if I'm going to write something, I wanted to sort of span. You know, because I don't think that just one experience is going to be the all-telling story, because there's a lot of stories here. There's a lot of experiences and a lot of emotions, a lot of perspectives, you know, and that's a lot of work to sort of sift through, you know. So that's why it took me a long time. You know, I had to figure out like what I wanted to write about, and then composing the poems, you know, from there. And that was, I think that took the longest. Because then once I got the poems that I wanted to write about, then I had to then pull them out or put some in, go back and see if there were other journal entries that I wanted to write about or that I wanted to use as inspiration. So yeah, it's kind of gone back and forth, you know. So a lot of these poems aren't written in any order. Yes. Okay. Yes, I do. I have.
The question is, what's your favorite poem from your book, and will you share it with us?
Yes. I think my favorite poem in this collection is the very last poem. That one, I think, was sort of the miracle poem that just popped out of nowhere. Um, and I probably have to thank B.A. Van Cese, who is a photographer, who sort of forced me to sort of write this poem. And it ended up in one of his books, his photography books, because he told me, here's the words that you need to write the poem for. And he just gave me, "There is light there." And I'm like, what? So I kind of freaked out a little bit and just kind of meditated, whatever you call meditation. And I just kind of sat there. And I sat there for a long time just repeating that phrase, "There is light there." You know, I did my wandering room thing and just said it over and over and over, you know. And it's crazy what repetition does, you know. But this is what came out of that. And it concludes purposefully the ending of this book. Well, not the ending, but the last poem. There's light there. The ray is a bringer inside the beginnings